You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling podcast. What do we all have to do? We all have to give presentations, and presentations are a critical part of the sales process, but boy, do they suck. So many of them are just so terrible. They're all written by somebody else who's never met a customer, pretty slides, but the content is a little busy, a little too focused on us and not enough on our prospect. That's why I brought our guest on today. His whole job is making great presentations, and he's really been an award-winning presenter with Prezi. And Prezi is one of our partners, but it's not about just Prezi and the presentation and the slides. It's about how you give it. So we're going to talk about, not only the slides, but how do you give a great presentation that closes the deal and gets the deal moving in the right direction. Now, what are the three things I see wrong with presentations today? Well, first of all, they put everybody to sleep. Everybody's bored to death with these things because it's all about you, or me. It's not about the outcome that you want the person to take, the outcome that you want the person to have. That's what we really got to focus on in the presentations. So let's and this person's actually a listener of the podcast, so it's so fantastic to have somebody who loves the podcast who contacts me, says, I really want to share my expertise on presentations. I said, come on, because I love talking about it. I've always been the type of person, I try and keep as few slides as possible, make it a conversation, get them engaged, get them excited about what the problem that they have and the solution that you can provide for them, because that's really what we want to do. We want to engage them. It doesn't matter about the data. What matters is that get that emotion, elicit the emotion that they're feeling right now. Also, I want to make sure you're looking at Nudge.ai. They've got a great new ebook about how people make buying decisions. And they've got many different personas, from IT to marketing to sales. Whoever you sell to, they've covered it. So you get to learn how those top-level people make buying decisions. So check that out at nudge.ai.com, not just nudge.ai. Let's get into the interview. Hey, Greg, thanks for joining me today. As a way of getting started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Brian. Well, first of all, it's so cool to talk to you. I mean, I'm grateful to talk to you. I'm grateful for your podcasts. I mean, you're a pleasure to listen to. You've got some great guests, and I learn a lot from you and your guests, sometimes more from you by the questions that you ask. So I'm very grateful to you about that. And I'm pretty excited to be here today. Yeah.
Well, tell us how you got interested in presentations.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm coming with like a confluence of skills and like in the trenches experience. And so I graduated from Cooper Union School of Art, Architecture, and Engineering in New York, and studied communication design. And I went out to be a graphic designer. And I realized I really couldn't make a good living in that because I was always very downstream from creating the really good ideas that art directors would come up with. So I decided to basically quit all that and go into sales. And I spent many years selling enterprise software and services. And that's where I fell in love with sales. And it was only a few years ago that I decided that I really, saw a huge need, because most presentations that I've seen and watched people do, and presentations that I were doing, I was really trying to just upgrade the presentations because most of them just suck. They're just horrible. Yeah. And they suffer from a lot of the same problems. And so I saw a huge need. And so I started a side gig helping people in companies just upgrade their presentations from the way it looks perspective. But then it soon moved to how it's structured and how they can create more engagement in these what I call structured conversations. And so I quit my job, as it were, and started my own business, and it's going really well.
Cool. And what would you say is like the number one thing that's wrong with most presentations?
Yeah, so it's funny, last night, in advance of this podcast with you, I don't know why it was, but I woke up, and I've been giving this like tons of thought and practice every day with customers, right? But I looked at my watch at 3:52 a.m., woke up, and what popped into my mind is something I really had to write down, which was why most presentations fail. And I turned to the side of my bed. I got out my iPhone and punched in Evernote. And here's what I typed out. Very simply, the reason why most presentations fail is because people are thinking that my presentation is more important than your interest.
Okay. Yeah, I can't agree more.
It's thinking that my presentation that I'm delivering to you right now is more important than your interest in whatever it is I'm presenting. And that is the number one reason why most presentations fail, because presenters and speakers get so caught up in their own purpose and their own thinking that what they have to deliver is like the best thing ever, instead of just focusing on what's most important to the people that they're presenting to. And all problems in presentation, from design to structure to everything that you see horrible out there, everything that you see that sucks out there, stems from this bad thinking. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I think that's the key thing, is that we're thinking solely about us instead of the problem that we're solving, the current situation our prospect is in, what they care about, and how to communicate it.
Yeah.
So how do you repair that?
So the way I repair that with is an approach. It's helping people see that a presentation really has three parts. And think of it like a Venn diagram. You got three circles, and in one circle you have you as the presenter. Another circle, you've got the topic that you're presenting on, and the other topic is the audience interest. And the beauty of this thinking of this triad, or this Venn diagram of three things, instead of the duality of, me versus you, I've got the solution and you've got the problem. The duality problem really forces people into the thinking that people have to sit down, shut up, and listen to my 67-slide PowerPoint. However, if you think about your presentation as like this three-part piece where there's the topic that you're talking about, there's you, the presenter, and there's the audience interest, it allows you as a presenter to almost stand shoulder to shoulder with your audience or your client as a companion, and you are looking at the topic together, that third leg of the stool. You're looking at it, you're talking about it, you're advising about it, but you're able to have some space and some neutrality away from the topic, because maybe you don't have all the answers. Maybe there's something that happens in the middle of the presentation that is an aha moment for you as a presenter. And this is a huge shift in thinking for a lot of people that are stuck in this sort of what I call the duality of presentation. Does that make sense, Brian?
Yeah, it does. What I've often seen is first it's all about us instead of them. So all the people here is me, me, me. And I think if you don't engage them quickly in something that they care about, they drift off. And I think that's what we got the death by PowerPoint quote from, was, here's our building, here's our founders, here's their pedigree, here's all the awards we've won, and nobody cares. Right?
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. So how do you get people focused, or us focused, on what we should care about and what they care about?
Well, that's the first thing you have to do. And even people say, oh, well, we know what we care about. We had discovery sessions with you. We had 3 conversations, and so we've got this presentation prepared. So please sit down and listen to my 90-slide PowerPoint. Wrong. You always have to start out the presentation, everyone, even if you think you know everything, with a question. And that question could be to an audience of 3 or 2 or 10, which is, what is most important to you? What would you like to accomplish? What are you trying to accomplish? And, you could even preface the presentation with, okay, I'm prepared today to show you 3 things. And these things were really coming out of the conversations that we've had so far. And I'm super excited about going to share with you these things. However, before we begin, let's just go around the room here and ask you one question, which is, what is most important to you about this in your role? Or what would you like to get out of this presentation today so something new can come out? So what I'm saying here is that, and I'm going to just pause that sort of role play, is that you need to present to the gap, because we live in a time where information is everywhere. It's on Ask Siri, Ask Alexa. Information is cheap. Your answers are cheap. All right. People come to your talk, your presentation, having read your white papers, have looked at your website, even read your proposal. So to come to your presentation, sit down, shut up, and watch my 62-slide PowerPoint, people check out on that. So the only way to really deliver a great presentation is to actually identify the gap up front in the conversation so that during the presentation you can speak to that.
Now, when you say gap, you mean from where they are today to where you want them to be by the end of the presentation. Is that
clear?
No.
The gap is from where they
where
what
they
they
are.
understand about the situation, or what they stand about the solution, or what they want about the solution. That maybe that there's something that they want to get out of this presentation that you don't know about, or that you need to find out about, or you don't have that base covered. Or maybe it's exactly what you've come to present, so it gives you the power and authority to jump on it with both feet. Or maybe their question at the beginning says, well, what's most important to me is finding out if you've really completed a solution like the one that we have. And it's important to me because last time we did this with another company, blah, blah, blah. So you find out some things that really help you focus on what's most important and deliver a great presentation. And that shouldn't always just happen in the beginning. And I've got a structure that I like to share. It's a 5-part structure that really helps people deliver awesome presentations. That's just the first part.
Well, let's get into that. So let's start with a question. I think that's great. You bring people up to speed. You kind of check the audience to make sure you have a good starting point. Somebody will probably raise an issue that's important. You also get to see the political dynamics of the people in the audience.
Exactly.
What's number 2?
Well, I don't even want to go to number 2 because number 1 is really where the magic is at.
Yeah. You could make the whole hour about that, right?
Yeah, it's really so important because number 1 stresses a lot of things. It shows, it demonstrates to your audience that you're there not just to project your solution, but you're there to partner. You're there to create a relationship. You're there to understand. You're there to empathize with what they're doing today and what their problems are, even though they might not actually tell you what their problems are. You're putting yourself in a position, I like to say, as almost like a corporate therapist to really understand. So I love helping people with that first part because the other parts, 2 through 4, come pretty naturally, and you find them even in presentations that suck. They still have a credibility section. They still have a solution section. So we're going to go into the 5. So, right. Go on.
So what is credibility, or what characteristics of credibility resonate the best in your experience?
Yeah. So the second section that I recommend, and first of all, it doesn't have to be 5. In fact, if you can put a presentation in 3 parts, that's the best, the best way to present. I mean, there's a power of 3, and you do it, Brian, with your content, with what is it? First you have to know someone, and then you have to like them and trust them is the third before you can even do business, right? You have that model.
Yeah. I kind of use that as, because 3 is that magic number, because we can all remember 3. That's why the phone number is area codes 3. 3, and I think 7 is the maximum that most people can remember.
Totally. And you even have that with technique, technology, and timing.
Yep.
So, because it's easy to remember, friends, Romans, countrymen, past, present, future, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. It's everyone understands the power of 3. So it would be perfect and great if you can put your presentation into 3 parts and say there are 3 things that I'm going to talk to you about today. But before we get into that, let me ask you some questions. So, I mean, the 5-part rubric that I'm going to talk about today is good because essentially it's wrapped up by a question up front and a question on the back end, but still has 3 in the middle. Anyway, there's some neuroscience that points to people don't remember 2 as well as they remember 3 things, and I can't understand why. Even people don't remember 4 things, but they remember 5 things. I'm not sure if you heard about that, but it's so fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I've tried to go to 5. You know, when I have a co-host on the show, we talk about the top 5. And it's a great way to get the other person to prepare, too, because 5's manageable. 3's, when you ask somebody to give you 3, you say, oh, that's too simple. But you do remember 3. I mean, that's the story. If you say, what's a story? Oh, it's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, that doesn't say anything, does it? It's like, of course, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, but that doesn't tell me what a story is, right? But when I give presentations or demos, I try and say, okay, this is what your world's like today.
Yeah.
This is the transition you're going to go through, and this is the outcome you're going to get. And people can grasp that. It's so simple.
Yes. Yeah, as opposed to someone coming in and I've got a slide here and we do this, and oh, by the way, we do a little bit of that, and oh, there's also this too. I mean, that's what you see every day. It's freaking horrible.
Right.
You know, it's like scattered pearls. Yes, it's cool, but they're not like connected on any thread whatsoever. There's no story.
And that's it. And what I see a lot of marketers and salespeople talking about is, educate the we're not in the education business. We're in the persuasion business, because education is passive, where the teacher shows the stuff, student gets it or doesn't get it. It's up to the student to learn it. Persuasion puts the onus on the presenter, not the recipient. And I think that's what we have to think about when we talk about a presentation. Even in the podcast, I've got to persuade you that either my point of view or a point of view is going to help you make more money, be more successful. That's my job. I'm not here to tell you information and you either take it or you don't.
So what are you saying now, that the persuasion method of presenting is what?
Well, that's what I see wrong with presentations, where it's
Yes.
all about, let me tell you about artificial intelligence and how it's going to change your life. You know,
Yeah.
let me tell you what you're going to miss out if you don't take advantage of this. This
Yes.
this is what your competition is going to be able to, focus their resources much more effectively. Then all of
Right.
a sudden you get that missing out. You try and play on what are the emotions that are going to drive that prospect.
So what you just described in my mind was, you just said, let me tell you the benefits of this. So you're standing, as it were, as a companion next to your client, pointing to something and discussing it, but you're not that thing. You're separated from that. And that's that distinction I was talking about earlier. Anyway, we talked about like these 3 parts or 5-part pieces. And the reason why that's important is because it helps people put into buckets when they're creating a presentation. What is my story? And how am I going to structure this story so it hangs together? And that's why I think the best benefit that I offer clients, and we do hundreds of presentations, is helping them construct a structured conversation that has buckets, or that has what I call presentation pillars. And so we start out with like a mind map of all the things that we want to talk about. And this mind map coalesces around these structures or these pillars. And 3 pillars are great. 5 pillars tops, no more in terms of that. So, Brian, shall I go through that second pillar? I think the credibility piece is what I was.
Yeah. I guess if you could give us an example, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So before you start talking even about the problem, and like Challenger Sale is great with laying out what the problem is that you're dealing with and why this is critical. But even before you can talk about the problem, you kind of have to lay out your credibility and what gives you the right to even talk about my business and talk about all of this. And so credibility can take, I don't know, a slide And typically that's the logo slide. Typically that's a case study slide. That's a slide that gives you the authority to really take the gloves off and ask questions like, here's your or tell people, here's your problem. This is why you're not making your numbers, or why you're not succeeding today. Or, it gives you the authority to do that. If you skip over that credibility part and you just basically tell people why they're ugly and why they're not in shape and why they're failing, you'll get rejected pretty fast. They won't say it necessarily, but what is your take about that? So without establishing some credibility.
Yeah, I think, because credibility, you could interpret a couple of ways, whether there's a significant problem. Let's say you want to lose weight. Okay, what emotion is going to drive that person to care? You don't want to call them fat. What you want to do is explain the health, social, and interpersonal challenges of being overweight. And all of a sudden now they're open-minded. And what emotion are you eliciting? Is it fear? Is it greed? Is it the fear of missing out? Is it what is going to drive them? Because they're going to make a decision based off of an emotion and justify it with logic.
Totally.
So I think you're trying to elicit that emotion.
Yes, and I think the emotion comes out and can come out anywhere, and veiled often in comments. But in terms of structuring your presentation, credibility is an important base to stand on before you dive into the third pillar, which typically is explaining the problem or empathizing with the client's situation in that problem and getting them to talk about the impact of that problem, or to share with them what the impact is. And maybe they're not, telling you that, oh yeah, it's affecting our bottom line, or oh yeah, we're spending $1 gazillion on this and we have no return, or oh yeah, we're still acting like we're doing in the 90s. They may not come out there and say that, but you could come out there and say that other clients in similar situations have the following impact. And so that's the problem area. That's the third pillar of great presentations, especially sales presentations. They hit that problem area really well. I mean, that's covered a lot in spin selling, challenger model, and you can name it. That's a key aspect to most sales customer-centric solution selling models, is to focus a part of your presentation on the problem. So I would say that's the third bucket. Your thoughts?
I agree completely, because, are you going to do more to prevent the loss of $1,000 or to gain $1,000? Right? Yeah, you're going to do a lot to prevent losing $1,000. So that you got to bring out that pain, and and pain can be interpreted negatively, but pain can be the fear of losing out, the fear of falling behind. That's all pain.
Yeah.
Do you want to be the poorest person in your industry? Or if you don't have that emotion, then you're not going to get open ears. You're not going to get people who are going to believe you.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a problem, there's no need to have a solution, right?
Yeah.
I have a friend who talks about having me get a new car all the time, but I don't really have to drive very, very far at all. And I'm like, I don't have a pain. Would I like to have a beautiful new car? Of course I would, but there's no pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And in terms of talking about the pain, this is where the way that you as a salesperson talk about pain, this is your style. Like, there's some salespeople or presenters, or even just whoever's presenting, take a very empathetic view about pain, and they are very sympathetic. And there's other salespeople or presenters that talk about your pain in terms of like a drill sergeant, like, suck it up, soldier, really just have a different style of talking about pain. And all that's fine. That's just personality stuff. What we're talking about here is a structure that almost like it's a structure that anybody in any style of presenting in any way could put on, and to empower their own way of presenting. So I'm not an advocate, and I just want to pause on 2 points here. I'm not an advocate of telling people or changing the style or the way that people present, because that doesn't work, because people just need to be themselves. People love you, Brian, and love me with all my flaws for who we are, not because of how we pretend to be other people. And so my advice for people is not to pretend to be anything other than they are, but really come prepared with a structure so that they can present with. And there's a real beauty to that. I mean, consider Elon Musk, for example, right? He's a great presenter, but he's so awkward and so a nerd and a geek, but people love to watch him present. And why? Because he doesn't pretend to be a great public speaker. He doesn't use all the techniques for public speaking. Screw that. And people love to hear him speak because he comes armed and prepared with a clear structure for what he's going to talk about. And everything else is natural. So I'm not sure how you feel about that.
That's so true, because I watched his presentation of, the new truck and the new car that he's coming out with. And you can just see the awkwardness and geekiness, but you see through that. And then you can contrast, Steve Jobs versus who's the current CEO?
Tim Cook.
Tim Cook, yeah. Tim Cook is a a polished presenter, right? Where you can tell he was coached and rehearsed, where Steve Jobs is a natural presenter. And I think your point is great, that you got to cover these things, but how you cover it is fine. That's your style. And I think too many people, the presentation comes from marketing with the words on it. And I've literally worked at a company where the CEO says, if you don't present all 74 of these slides, you're going to lose deals. And I go, and I told him, I go, if I present all 74 of these slides, I will never win a deal.
Awesome. That's awesome. And I've got some suggestions for bringing peace between sales and marketing if we get to that later. But I know we got a couple more bases to talk about. But before we do, there's another piece. Here we are in the middle of our presentation. We're past credibility. We are, empathizing with the problem in our own style. Now we're into the fourth pillar, which is we're just about to get into the solution. But before I talk about the fourth pillar, I think I want to point out now that in the presentation you're doing, this is not a freaking TED Talk. People in businesses don't give TED Talks. They think they should be. They think they want that kind of captive audience. But audiences don't want a TED Talk. They want a partnership. They want to understand. They want to interact. They want to come to a presentation and learn something specific to their role, their job, what they're trying to accomplish. So I want to point out that you need to have a way to capture people's questions and thinking while you're presenting. If it's just a dictation, if it's just a sermon on the mount, you can guarantee that people are going to be checking out as fast as they can. So I wanted to point out that you could set up a structure that even in the beginning that you're asking people questions, you can keep questions up on the board. You can even use technology like Slido.com or pollanywhere.com so that you can, while you're presenting, you can invite people to ask questions to you. And while they're asking questions on their phones, take out your phones right now. You can just set this up in the beginning of the presentation and say, we've got like 13 people in the room. I want to tap the wisdom of this group. I want to we have limited time together. I want to answer the questions that are most important. Go to slido.com/IBM or whatever the acronym is that you want to create. And people will go there on their phones. And people have their phones out anyway, by the way. You're presenting, people are looking at Facebook, people are checking email. So it's like, why not engage them anyway with their phones? Say, as an option, take out the phone. And while I'm presenting here, I want you to type out your questions. What's coming to mind? What would you really like me to focus on? And you can see other people's questions, and you can ask them anonymously, by the way, so that real honesty and truth comes out. The CEO's in the room, and the the marketing guy is asking a question anonymously, and boom, it rises right to the top because everybody in the room could upvote that question. So if you've got 10 people in the room upvoting and downvoting questions, even before you get to the questions, all that shit is going on in the room, which is awesome, so that by the time you get to the solution pillar, which is pillar number 4, there are questions up there that have been upvoted and downvoted. So let me take another quick segue. So talk about Elon Musk as we were before. He was delivering a presentation to an audience about the flight to Mars. And it was a 40-minute presentation with unbelievable detail about how they're going to build a rocket, how they're going to get to Mars with 1 million people by 2050 or something like that. Anyway, it was totally amazing. The first person that gets up to the microphone to ask Elon Musk a question, he was asking a question about, well, I was at Burning Man and I couldn't find a bathroom and there's poop everywhere. So how are you going to deal with poop on Mars? And I was like, oh my God. So like if he was using some technology like Slido, for example, where the group was crowdsourcing questions and upvoting, I guarantee you that question would find its way to the bottom, to the poop level. And the question that everybody wanted Elon to ask would rise to the top. So I'm going to close that segue because you can actually employ that kind of technology in your presentations so that you use the best, you basically tap the wisdom that's already in the room to have the best conversation about the topic.
That's a great example. Now,
yeah, go on.
Now you always have like end with a question. Now you're really focused on questions, and why is that?
Yeah, because if I was a teacher at the Parsons School of Design, and I know to look in front of a group of kids, I say kids, 19 to 17 to 19-year-olds. If you want to know something about presenting, teach a group of teenagers. And and that's who we all are. We're all essentially teenagers at heart. And the best way to present is to continually ask questions and to engage people's brains, not just to say, be quiet and let me present.
That's it, because I mean, even presenting has changed. So much more of it now is done online. And sure. I try and watch, I watch most of the webinars on YouTube because I can't stand allocating time during the day for them, because there's, you can't fast forward through them. You can't, it's just, you have to set it up. You have to get everything to work on your computer. So I think presenting now is so much more important because you have to engage people. Otherwise you just lose them.
Yeah. I mean, look at Facebook Live. I mean, I saw Mark Zuckerberg, presenting something on Facebook Live, and it was like a flood of questions. Of course, he didn't answer, but anyway, if you're presenting to a smaller group, even on Facebook Live, people are naturally just they want to comment, they want to throw up hearts or throw up angry faces, they want to engage. This is how people learn, and in the future, the future of presentations is going to be that exponential. People are going to want to engage in this process of learning, in the process of your presentation. The age of presentations being a transmission of information died in the 90s. Yeah. That's why the 74-point slide PowerPoint deck is useless today, because information is everywhere. People can get that information. People don't go to your presentation to learn shit. They go to your presentation to ask questions. So that's why my focus is so much about the Q&A part, because that should be happening in the beginning, at the end, and during your presentation. When people are thinking about what you're talking about, give them a technology, give them a way to put their ideas out there. Because even if you don't get to the questions during the presentation, or even after, a week after, or the day after, you can read those and you can follow up and engage with those people. This is especially good with a webinar. If you get flooded with questions and there's only 2 more minutes left, you don't have to answer everyone's question during the webinar. You can just answer the most important one and get back to people afterwards.
Well, that's it. I think if you had a superpower during a presentation, would probably what you'd want is mind reading. And the closest thing you come to mind reading is people asking questions.
Totally.
Right? So
yeah.
So how important is humor?
Yeah. So, Yes. So I have a philosophy on humor. It's totally not funny. Because I'm not funny. I'm not a funny person. I never was. And I don't try to be funny. I never do. Because whenever I've tried to be funny, it falls flat and it's awkward and it hurts badly. So I just basically be my boring self. I be my boring sort of, thinking I'm an academic self. And I just let the cards fall where they are. And sometimes things are funny and I laugh at them. Sometimes I laugh at myself. Sometimes people laugh at me. But I think that to try to be funny is probably the worst presentation advice that anybody can give you.
Oh, I think what you're really saying is play to your strengths.
Yeah. If you're a funny guy, funny, gal, then be funny. Come out with the humor. Be that. But if the worst thing you can do is come out with a canned joke, as we saw like in that video you shared, right? I mean, it's just awful.
And how about using words versus pictures?
Sure. So best practice, bullet points will kill your presentation. Don't use them. That's the number one thing we help with clients after we basically bucketize or structure their pillars is we delete all the bullet points and we put up visuals, charts, diagrams, distinctions that trigger a conversation or that trigger a distinction that you need to make. So I don't want to fail the folks that are listening to this by not mentioning the last two of the 5 pillars. I set up the first 3, and I think I just very quickly want to cover the last 2.
Let's go.
Okay, so after you talk about the problem, which is the 3rd pillar, the 4th is the solution. And so this is a fundamental piece. I mean, everyone's got a solution. That's why you're presenting. However, I think a big distinction to make when you're talking about the solution is that it's not your solution. And when I usually say that to people, they're like, what are you talking about? This is our software. And I'm like, well, no. The success that your clients have with your software is because of why. And the answer is typically, well, it's how they use it and how they deploy it that determines their success. Because I'm sure they've got customers that bought their software and are not successful. And this is the number one problem that your software companies say is, oh, well, the customer didn't deploy it right, or they didn't invest enough in configuring it right to their solution. That's why they failed. So it's like, if we call a spade here, the solution isn't really ours as the sellers. The solution is the customer. And I don't know how you feel about that. But in my book, if a customer has a problem, the only solution that they're going to come up with is going to be their own. Well, what do you think, Brian?
I think you have to make your prospect or your past customers the hero in the story.
Yes.
As opposed to you or your product. Once you do that, when they see what the outcome that they get from it, right? Because what's the outcome of owning a car? It's not just getting to a different location. It's how you feel in that car.
That's it.
The attention you get maybe, or how comfortable it is, the acceleration, the music, the getting away from everything. It's not the car. It's the feeling that the car gives you.
So getting back to this presentation, so if salespeople are presenting their solution and they're focused on their own stuff and not what their stuff is going to do for that customer and how it's going to impact them and the outcomes that this thing will do for them, I think they're really missing putting the emphasis, as my dad say, on the wrong syllable.
Cool. So what's the final one?
The final one, like the first, is ending with a question. So what do you think about all that? Or, was there anything here that was surprising to you? Or was there anything here that was exactly the same as what you've seen before? What was the same? What was different? Ending with a question that helps you understand how everything landed, how they heard your presentation. And hopefully by the time you get to this point, they will have already thought about questions because you've invited them in the beginning to think about specific things they want to ask. You don't want to get to the end of your presentation and say something like, are there any questions? because that's awful.
Right.
And
Yeah.
feel really awkward. Like, well, I don't want to be the guy that asks a question that's not relevant. So you should ask specific questions at the end instead of general questions like, are there any questions? You should say, like, well, we talked about how this can improve your return on investment with shipping. What did you think about that?
Yeah.
So if you ask people specific questions, they'll give you a specific answer and feel comfortable. But to ask a general vague question is a recipe for disaster in a presentation. So those are the 5.
Excellent. Hey, I really appreciate your time today. If people want to learn more about your work and you, how do they find out about you?
Sure. Go to pitchkitchen.com, where we help organizations cook up awesome presentations.
Hey, let me know what you thought about that. I mean, presentations, people talk about it a lot, but, there's different styles. But the key thing is to make sure it works. So what I got out of that is make sure you have your objective in mind before you have a presentation. But really, look what check his website out, Pitch Kitchen, and just basically follow a formula. Whatever it is, make sure it is a formula that you can really talk to and communicate that value. Think about what is the objective of that presentation? What do you want to get out of it? You're not going to get the order most likely, unless it's a B2C one call type presentation. But if it's a B2B presentation, what you probably want is the next step. What would you like to do next? What's next? Is a great question to end up at it, before you leave the presentation room or get offline. Because today we're doing a lot of these online. And if you're doing it online, you've got to be 10 times more interesting because there's 10 times more distractions at their end. They're playing with their phone. People are calling them. People are running into the office. Lots of distractions going on there. And make it about them. Make sure you can elicit their pain before you talk about the solution. Talk about examples of other people and what they've accomplished and engage them in a conversation. The conversation is good. The questions, the interrupts, they're typically very good. And what I always try to say, try and get as few people as possible in the presentation until they're really interested and qualified and want to learn more. The one-on-one is the most effective, by far, because people will be open and will give you the objections and tell you how to present it. And I'll give you a secret trick I used to do. I used to run through a presentation with my coach, whoever was interested in the product, and get their feedback and say, well, let me just run it by you, make sure I'm covering the things you want me to. I got to cut this presentation down and your feedback is critical. Give me 20 minutes to run through it with you, just so we both look like we know what we're doing. And what's even better is when the customer presents it with you. Like when you're really doing like the cook-off, the bake-off, where they open the oven, this is what the dish looks like after you did all the technical due diligence. I've done that, and it is insanely more powerful. Hey, those are some super tricks right there. Also, I hope you're checking out the B2B Revenue Show. It's not just for managers. There's lots of good stuff on there. I'm telling you, you get perspective of how, CEOs, CROs, CMOs are really thinking about what's working today. And you just get to get their perspective about, how they view the world. So you can kind of see it through their eyes. And I really appreciate everybody who's talking about the podcast, sharing it on social, and if you like it, do you have anybody? Just do me a small favor and find a friend that in sales, and this is for your own benefit too, to talk about the podcast with, get their perspective on it. Because I get questions all the time like, oh, how do you practice sales? Well, you could do it a lot. You could sit down and talk to other salespeople about, not whining. I'm not talking about water cooler talk, complaining about the comp plan, the product, the company, that serves no purpose. It really does. It just, gets you down emotionally. I'm talking about really getting, an ecosystem of friends within your industry, even within your company or with people who are also selling in a similar space. Find out what's working for them. Find out how they're getting around these things, and just tell them about the podcast, and I've always liked to have salespeople on the podcast because it's what you're facing that I'm out here trying to help with. But I'm facing the same thing. I'm doing the same thing you guys are doing. So check that out. Also on LinkedIn, I'm dropping a funny video every morning just as a way of breaking the ice with the followers, funny business, not just funny. And, if you happen to see it, please like it, comment, or share. Just tell me, hey, I heard you on the podcast on the ride into work today. And I just wanted to say hi. And I hope you're all finishing out the year strong. You can keep sending me the questions. I'll answer them as soon as I can. I apologize. I've been traveling a lot, and fighting off a little bit of a cold. It just, it won't come on and it won't go away. But I'm here working for you. Also, that course is coming out January 1st. Start the conversation, get the meeting. It's going to be not just an online course, but I'm going to throw in some consulting, individual consulting that I'm going to record and share with the other participants of it. So it's kind of course consulting. And it's really sharing my magic cadence that I've developed as a way of using email and social to start conversations and get meetings with the qualified, highly desired prospects. So look forward January 1st. Also, connect up with me on LinkedIn. Come on. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
I want to know the truth, because deep down in places that you don't talk about are team and management meetings. You want me on that call. You need me on that call. We use words like fleet view, volume control, total cost of ownership. We use these words as a backbone of a life spent negotiating something. You use them as a punchline. I have neither the time nor inclination to explain myself to people who rise and sleep under the very blanket of revenue that I provide and then question the manner in which I provide it. I would rather you just said thank you and went on your way. Otherwise, may I suggest you pick up a phone and make some sales calls. Either way, I don't give a damn what you think you're entitled to.
Did you expense the lap dances?
I did the job I was hired.
Did you expense the lap dances?
You're goddamn right I did!